for September. I will entertain a motion for the approval of the August 9, 2022 Personnel Committee minutes.
Second.
And then any comments? No? I think it looked good to me as well. So we'll go ahead and take a vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That's an aye, a visual aye from Alder Radefrada. And motion carried. Move on to agenda item 3, public appearances for non-agenda items. We do not have anybody in chambers or online for that. So we can move on to agenda number 4, agenda item A. I'm sorry. Agenda item A, the 2022 market poll. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Sarah.
Yeah. Good evening in personnel. We're really excited. We have a special guest here today, Patrick Glenn from Carlson Detman Consulting. He recently performed our market poll, so we're excited to share that with you tonight. Afterwards, Chad and I will talk with you kind of about our implementation plan and ideas and get your input and your approval on steps on moving forward. So I also have a document that I'll share for viewers at home that you also have in front of you today. That kind of goes into a little bit more detail as far as, how do different types of employees, how are they affected by this market poll, whether they're a long-term employee, whether they're an entry-level employee, kind of the challenges and the results of the market poll. So with that, I'll turn it over to Patrick to share with you kind of what they were tasked to do.
Good evening. I guess just a quick introduction is probably in order since I haven't worked with this group. I've known Sarah for a long time and have known about this project. I think previously you'd work either with Charlie or Katie on this project back in 2014, 2015. Exactly. And I was with the firm at that time. I joined in 2013. I spent 19 years in the public sector in county government as Director of Human Resources until I made the leap. And now I'm the new Charlie, I guess, for lack of a better term. I direct our public sector team, and Matt Shevchik, who actually is from the Madison area, leads our private sector team. And this is what we do. We do compensation work, public sector, private sector, not-for-profit, utilities. And as you can imagine, this is probably the busiest time, in my 9 years of doing this, the busiest time I've seen. And 2023 is probably looking just as hectic, just with everything that's going on. And in fact, as we start this evening, I have a few slides in here to kind of talk about what's going on in the marketplace, because I think it lends credence to some of the things that we're going to be talking about and some of the options that we're going to be looking at. I always put this slide in here when we have these first introductions, with a committee, because you can come back and say, well, why don't we tinker with this or tinker with that? And the numbers will then inevitably change. So I just want to make certain that they're in draft. Everything's in draft format until it's final. I get that. And that's kind of the stance that we are in right now. But as it relates to the market challenges that we're dealing with, a lot of these have been kind of percolating even prior to the pandemic, but I think for whatever reason, it was the perfect storm the last 2 or 3 years for a lot of these issues just really to come to the forefront or get the attention that they probably have deserved. I know when I joined the workforce back in the mid-90s, the conversation was, hey, the baby boomers are going to exit the workforce someday. And it was kind of this ominous thing. And all of a sudden, in reality, they're beginning to exit the workforce. And in fact, I believe in 2020 or 2021, there was 1 million more retirements than were previously expected. And it's put a tremendous strain on us as employers, as people looking to enter and or progress through the workforce. There's just been a lot of turnover. And believe it or not, Generation X is on deck for retirement. If you look at the Wisconsin retirement qualifications, age 55 or age 57, that's where Generation X is right now. So we're going to see that next wave start to work its way through. And then with the reduced population growth, there's been a lot of reports out there in terms of just population growth in general being a challenge in the country, but also if you track, Wisconsin Counties Association has an arm called Forward Analytics that they do a lot of studies about different things, and just this, in the last couple of weeks, they published one about the migration challenges in Wisconsin, that we're not bringing in the people that we should be, and the people we should be keeping are leaving, and which is, again, putting a lot of pressure on employers, especially in the public sector. And then as we talk about these generational shifts, there's different expectations. I think the one thing that the human resources profession has gotten done right over the course of the last decade or so is really kind of figuring out what different segments of employees are looking for, and how do we respond to that from a workplace standpoint. I know some of the things you've been talking about and we've talked about on the side, deal directly with that. How do we bring in people with the necessary skills, and how, that maybe this generation values vacation and time off more than they do certain elements of pay. So we're shifting and molding on the fly. And then we get to wages. And boy, is that fun. Last year we began the year with a lot of conversation around this notion that the minimum wage is going to change. And legislatively, nothing happened. Practically, everything did. The notion of $15 an hour being the floor, we're seeing movement to that, and quite honestly beyond that. Jobs, a lot of jobs in the private sector that we observed as $12, $13, $14, $15 an hour jobs just 5 years ago are $20 to $25 an hour, depending on the market, depending on the employer. But that puts a lot of pressure on you as an organization. How do we keep up? As we'll talk about a little bit later, that data has not entered any of the surveys yet. That action, I think a lot of the action has been taken where people are working within existing pay structures as opposed to modifying theirs. And there's always a delay in getting the data into the surveys from the big sources that we would acquire. Then the pandemic hits, and the first thing I have on that list, I think it's important because this is a barrier to your recruitment activities. If you're like any other employer, that I spent the first 19 years of my career as an HR director saying, we can't work remotely. I got to be here. Pandemic proved us wrong in many regards. That, we were just joking about the VPN technologies that we have to deal with, or as we're sitting here on Zoom and conducting this meeting partially remote as well, that we found the niches where it is possible. But in the public sector, you have a lot of organization, or a lot of, such as yours, that it's people. We need people in the building, on the streets, wherever they're needed, and it's not something that can be done remotely. So again, while pay has traditionally been the number one reason why people leave or don't take a job, that remote work is rising to that, on the top of that list pretty quickly. That we're seeing people leave jobs because they can go remote. I don't have to commute for an hour, half hour, whatever that number is. But in the public sector, when we're competing with that, it just makes it a little bit more challenging. And especially since people have the freedom to live pretty much anywhere they want and do their work in many respects. We find a lot of our northern Wisconsin communities, actually, I don't want to say they're doing great, I think that would be a misstatement, but they're seeing an influx of people who might have otherwise been up there only in the summer months because they have the availability to do the work that they want to do where they want to do it. And then the social issues that, again, have always been there, and I would like to think that the work that we do in terms of pay equity, it's not a concern of ours, only because the processes that we use take that out of the equation, and we'll talk very briefly about that this evening. Transparency really isn't a concern of ours, at least mine, on our half of the business, because I work in the public sector. Everything's transparent. The open meetings, open records law ensure that. But the one thing that I think in the public sector that we don't always do such a great job of shouting from the mountaintop is this notion of purpose and meaning. You see that mentioned a lot in a lot of the articles that get published. And in fact, Harvard Business Review a couple years ago did a brief study where they talked about, it was either 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 employees would take less pay for a job that had purpose and meaning attached to it. And the public sector has that baked into almost every single department. And so the marketing efforts that I think would greatly improve, some recruitment as it relates to how it truly is serving the community or the role that it fits. And so this notion of purpose and meaning, I think is invaluable as we start talking about how are we going to battle, because pay is not the only thing that's going to get you through this. Pay needs to be sufficient, and that's what I do for a living, so I need to make sure I have a job. But at the same time, culture, purpose and meaning hold a very close second to that. Some of these slides I'm going to go through, I'm going to breeze through them. This presentation is available to you after the fact, so this is just kind of the lead-in as you're going through it, explaining what it is you're actually looking at. But we track layoffs and quits for a very important reason. Before the pandemic, so you can see those gray bars being periods of the last recessions, and the pandemic was a very brief one, that there was an article in the Wall Street Journal, I even now forget about what it was about, but it had a chart similar to this that was tracking the voluntary quits, which is the blue line, versus the layoffs and discharges, which is the red line. And this was several years ago, so that distance was just growing. And the distance between those two lines is important to us because the more comfort that people feel in quitting their jobs for different employment, and the fewer employers laying off employees, puts pressure on wages from an employer standpoint. Someone leaves, I got to bring somebody in, perhaps I have to bring them in at a higher rate of pay. Maybe my pay wasn't competitive, so I need to update that. Before the pandemic, it was a problem, and it was a growing problem. After the pandemic, it is, I would almost get to the point of crisis. Unemployment has all but cratered, since that time, and the voluntary quits have skyrocketed. I think this lends credence to the notion of the Great Resignation, which we read a lot about in the newspapers. So we have that on a national basis. On the statewide level, same data, just Wisconsin data instead of national data. We were a little bit late to the party. I mean, there was some distance between those two lines, but then after the pandemic, you can see that gap has grown significantly just in the last couple of years. And so I think from a Wisconsin standpoint, we had frustrations going into it, but it wasn't the crisis that we're seeing now in terms of the recruitment, the retention, and trying to get people to stay. The other part, and I think the observation that we've made over the course of the last several years is in the public sector, the mentality used to be that come and stay a career. Hire somebody and you wake up and 15, 20, 30 years later, they would still be with the organization, hopefully in a different role as they progress through. But that's less and less of a concern, or not concern, it's a great concern. It's less of a reality in today's marketplace. I think many employers are happy if I can keep somebody 5 years. That's a great hallmark. If I can keep somebody a little bit longer than that, that's fantastic. But this notion of, is this a career destination? I think they're great jobs. I made a 19-year career out of it, but it's becoming more and more of a challenge. We hear a lot of talk about CPI, and I just put this in here because that's the number that gets all of the press. But it's also the number that's driving, I would presume, a lot of your frustrations as a city, as a council, and trying to put together a budget. That, we haven't seen CPI at this level since I believe it was 1982, 84, somewhere in that time frame. And it's really easy to talk about CPI adjustments to pay when the CPI is low. And so I have a lot of clients, over the course of the last year, CPI is 1.5%. That's the best we can do employees. I can understand that. That's not the only metric we should look at, but I can understand that. But when the argument doesn't always work in the reverse, where when CPI skyrockets, that we don't automatically run to maybe we should be providing 8.5% pay increases. There's a couple of reasons for that. The first one is that it really isn't the only metric you should be looking at. But second is that in the public sector in 1982, when the inflation was at this level, the answer could have been, not saying should have been, but could have been, perhaps we need to raise taxes commensurate with the rate of inflation to reach us, or look for revenue sources that would meet that. That's not really an option. It might be an option via referendum, but with the tax limits and those sorts of things, the hands are tied of many employers, public sector employers especially, in terms of how they respond to that. I've put on there the dotted red line kind of as the marker that over the course of time, if you take out all the outliers, the crazy 24% or the negative 16%, CPI runs about 3%. And that's what we would expect to see. Wage increases, whether it is, we conduct a survey every year World at Work, salary.com, and there's a lot of entities out there that conduct salary planning surveys. For the longest time, 10 to 20 years, structural increases were sitting right around 2%. That what I would expect to see, keeping your wage structure competitive with inflation and those matters. Probably, in fact, we had observed for many years over that it was probably lower than what it should have been, that the wages were stagnant and not moving as much as they should. So I think part of what we're seeing today, aside from all of the craziness, is just some pent-up demand as it relates to wages and not moving as quickly as they probably should have. Now, a lot of our city clients, I know you've done your best to make sure you are providing, appropriate and competitive wage increases. And I think that will be reflected as we start talking about some of the data this evening. But the reality, even though we don't talk about CPI as the only measure, inflation is a very real thing. We can't ignore it. You can see that, from 2019 through 2021, give or take a little, it was a positive effect. That, with the inflation or lack thereof, employees' pocketbooks were for the most part affected favorably. And then the last several quarters, with inflation, you can see that the decrease in average net, weekly take-home pay has been affected negatively. So employees are feeling this, I guess, is the point. And I don't think I'm telling you anything you don't already know, looking at that. The other metric, and again, I'll let you read this one on your own, but the employment cost index is another factor that is probably more related to where wage increases actually are going or moving. So when we look at this, historically, I'd say probably for the from 2001 till 2009, they tracked pretty closely. Public sector would eclipse the private sector for a while, and then it would flip-flop. But since that last major recession that we saw as a country, the public or private sector has eclipsed or passed the public sector every single year, or every single quarter, I should say, in terms of wage increases. It's not necessarily troubling until we see the last, I'd say, 3 or 4 quarters when we've seen the stark increase related to pay changes, where the private sector is pushing 6% and the public sector is sitting right around 3%. Makes sense, I understand it, but when we look at trying to compete for talent for jobs that exist in both sectors, I'll just, accountant, where you can find in both worlds, the private sector probably is going to have the edge. The remote work aspect, now maybe you have that ability here, maybe you don't, but also just from a pay standpoint, we're seeing more and more competition, and putting the public sector kind of in the back seat and trying to compete for some of this talent. In terms of where the wage increases are occurring, and I foreshadowed this a little bit, but I think this is straight from the Atlanta Federal Reserve website. They have a fantastic wage growth tracker. You can look at several factors influencing pay or where pay growth is occurring. So this chart, all it's showing is the first quartile of wage earners. That green line is seeing the largest wage increases right now. It's not a shock at all. It just says, talking about the $12 an hour job going to $20 an hour. That's exactly what's happening out there. And you can see how sharply that's increased over the last year and a half or so. And the bottom segment of the workplace, the fourth quartile, the top component of the workforce, but the lowest increases would be the fourth quartile of wage earners, the top level management. Now, I would argue that some of those wage increases have been deferred and not necessarily foregone, whether it be incentives or bonuses or those sorts of things. But in terms of base wage pay or base wages, the lower segments of the workforce are absolutely seeing that. So that's one challenge. The other one, and this has always been true, as I talked about before, why do you quit a job? More pay. Or at least that's what people tend to tell you. So that's always been true. For us, what at least gets our attention is how quickly that's increased. That it had been pretty consistently for some time, kind of in that 4% range. If I change jobs, I'm going to get a 4% raise. Now we're sitting at 6.5%. That's a wake-up call, especially for it to have increased that largely versus the green line, the job stayers. If I stay at my job, what type of a pay raise can I expect? And that you're seeing about 4.5%. So about a 2% difference between those two. One, the switchers are seeing a more lucrative opportunity to switch jobs, but employers are responding by offering greater pay increase to those who are staying. So, but there's a lot of movement and a lot of craziness in the marketplace that we're trying to offset. So that's kind of the underpinning of a lot of what we're talking about. This next table that I look at, and we use a metric called a compa ratio. All it is simply looking at an employee's current rate of pay in comparison to their midpoint. If they're at the control point or midpoint of their grade, their compa ratio would be 100%. If they were at the minimum, is it 87.5%, that's what their compa ratio would be. So we're just looking at by segments of the workforce by years of service. It's not the best metric, but it's the best available metric for that. My attention almost always goes down first to that very bottom row. What are you bringing new employees into the organization at? And if you were following your wage schedule strictly, which is incredibly difficult to do, but strictly, that net number should be right around 87.5%. You've had to lift a little bit to bring employees into the organization. I'm not at all shocked by that, but that's the first thing that, all right, you've had to stretch. Now, if you're hiring people with experience, that's fantastic. But if that's based on hiring people with minimum qualifications for the job, then it's probably a sign that the pay structure maybe needs a little bit of breath of life into it. And seeing more and more years of service, at least arguably, even though you have pay for performance in the upper portion of your structure, you should see that the longer somebody has been with you, the closer they're going to get to that maximum. And indeed, that's exactly what you're seeing. So by and large, I think your system is working for you and you're differentiating pay through years of service. But just a couple things that are, I wouldn't even call them red flags, light red flags or pink, whatever you want to describe it as. So just a couple things I want to run through just to make certain that we are on the same footing. Since it's been a few years since we did this, I'm not going to go through our job evaluation system in great detail, except for to remind you that every single job in your structure, whether it was in the original study or in occasional updates as they would be directed to us, have been reviewed using our point factor job evaluation system. And that's kind of what I was talking about before in terms of pay equity, that there's two good things about this. One, I know that there's no factor in our system that would touch on anything that would be one of those illegal topics for discussion. The other part is that from time to time, we get to work in the state of Minnesota. And the reason why that's good for our practice is that they have pay equity legislation that we actually have to pass a test, not a written test, but a statistical analysis of our work to make certain that our system is not discriminatory. And so we get an occasional validation that we're doing exactly what we should be in terms of this assessment. And so, again, this slide just is referring back to the prior one and just walking you through the types of questions that we go through when looking at each job. How large are the problems? How big are the decisions? How broad and impactful are the conversations? As well as the work environment and educational requirements are all those things that we look at to make certain that we have the jobs placed appropriately. And if I look at this chart, and by the way, I know I'm going quickly. I just want to make certain that if you want to stop me, if you have any questions, feel free to do so. But the first view of the world that we take in terms of metrics is based on current actual pay. How does it line up? So each one of these dots on our chart is a benchmark job. And I'll talk about what benchmark means in just a few moments here. But then we look at, with those benchmark jobs, how's the current pay look? And it's all over the place. And it should be all over the place. You have people with different lengths of service, you have different educational levels, you have other different reasons for matters in terms of differing from that line. But when we switch over and we look at the actual midpoints, it should look a lot like this. Really nice and neat. The midpoints are aligned with the job evaluation scores. The individual pay differs for any number of other factors. And I don't have that slide in here, so just make sure I don't. Doesn't matter. So the next thing we do is we take those same benchmark jobs and we look at the marketplace. And from the market standpoint, that there will be variation off that line as well, because the market looks at each individual job differently. We have different surveys that we use. I think 5 or 6 different surveys in addition to our own public sector database, to make certain that we're getting a good measurement of the overall market. So our first stop along that way is on that bottom right-hand portion of the graph, that R squared. The coefficient of determination is the fancy term for it. For us, it's how confident are we in the model that we've built for you, and are we able to give you pay recommendations based on that model? So from that standpoint, when we talk about model, what is it? Job evaluation scores, we already talked about. What surveys? Are we using the right data cuts? That is it a Madison area? Is it Wisconsin? Is it Midwest? All of those sorts of decisions that we need to make in analyzing the data, making certain that we're taking the outliers out. People who are, because sometimes there's just a mismatch in the data, that here's a job that should be $50,000 a year and somebody's paying it $30,000. Probably not a match from a survey standpoint. Here's a $50,000 a year job and someone's paying $90,000. Probably not something that we want to include in our data. So we're always making certain that we're watching for the outliers, as well as the benchmarks and any review or input that we have after the fact. Which finally gets us to where we stand and what are we recommending. So the first one is a comparable marketplace. And you're in one of those unique situations where your primary competition would be Dane County, City of Madison, University, those sorts of employers. But then there's also the question of who's like us. And, do we want to compare solely with that? There's something to be said for it, or do we want to also make certain, especially for some of the professional management level jobs, that a manager, for a city the size of Fitchburg is markedly different than a manager for a city of Madison type occupation. So it's not always an apples to apples comparison. So who's like you is important, but also who are you competing with? So in putting that together, tried to make certain that we had a good collection of mid-sized communities, especially if they are attached to a larger labor market. So if I look at De Pere, kind of being sandwiched between, attached to Green Bay, but also not just a hop, skip, and jump from Appleton, Madison, Middleton, Muskego, all kind of the Milwaukee, Madison corridor, I think, is very well represented here. But again, as I alluded to, having a very good cross-section of surveys, and we, especially the last couple of years, we've paid special attention to make certain that our survey data is up to date. I'll talk about it later in greater detail, but the one thing that we learned is normally in any other environment, a survey that we would purchase, comp data, for example, usually has a shelf life of about 2 years. The tool we use, we can age that data. That here's a survey from a year ago, we age it by 3%, and that data is valid. Not so much anymore. We found that we've had to purchase data on a much more frequent basis just so we can try to keep pace with knowing where the market is going for certain key jobs. Engineering, financial type jobs, tech is another one of those that we're always looking for data. So we've got a solid grouping of data sources, a solid grouping of comparable employers. And I have that repeated twice, so that's fantastic. We don't need to talk about it twice. But then the other one, and I think sometimes this gets a lot of lip service inside of an organization, and probably more than what it probably deserves. Our goal when building a pay structure is we want to have a representation of your workforce, your jobs in that. If a job isn't a benchmark, it usually means a couple of things. Either A, we just didn't have consistent data throughout all of our survey sources, including our own, to match it. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist in other communities. It just, that we try to hold ourselves to the same standard that the private sector has to hold to. We want at least 5 matches before we're making that match. So we know that not one organization is dragging a number up or dragging it down. So sometimes jobs simply won't be benchmarks for that reason and that reason alone. But as long as we have the top, the middle, the bottom of the structure represented, we can provide recommendations all day long. And if there are individual jobs where we need, this wasn't a benchmark, but we're having a heck of a time trying to fill that job. Do you have data on this job? Those conversations occur all the time. And so I just want to make certain that there's just not too much emphasis being placed. Is my job a benchmark job? Because it really, is not something that we spend a lot of time worrying about. So in this particular slide, we have listed the benchmark jobs from the top of the organization, to the bottom and everywhere in between. And so again, a very good representation, jobs that we consistently find inside and outside the public sector. So same slide, nothing new with this one, but we use this then, I just want to make certain, yeah. So we use it to build your pay structure, and I think I have the slide in here again once we actually talk about your wage structure, but just in the off chance that I don't, and I'm not going off memory here, that when we build your pay structure, we're using that Y equals number or equation to build your structure. That gray line, that Y equals is the slope equation for that line. How aggressively is it going based, as an increase in job evaluation score, how aggressively does the pay increase? And so if we have a job that is 400 points to 449 points is the range, and that job's 403. So it would fit within that grade. The middle value of that grade is 425 points. All we do to figure it out is we plug 425 into that equation, and that gives us the midpoint. It's important to know that only because I think sometimes people think we pull numbers out of thin air. We get the market data, we have the job evaluation score, and then we're able to then build a structure based on the marriage of those two data points. So from competitiveness standpoint, at first, and I had to take a step back, and thankfully Sarah and Missy reminded me of something that kind of settled me down a little bit in terms of because I would have expected you to be slightly behind the marketplace. And here, this graph shows that you are between, I'm just going to round, 1% and 6% over the market. But given your geography, the decision that was made with your last study back in 2014 was, and I have to imagine based on the conversations I had, that the Madison dynamic, the Dane County dynamic, poses a challenge, will continue to pose a challenge, and probably will, I'll hedge to say, forever be a challenge, that the city, and with our consultation, we applied a 10% increase to those rates, the market rates, to account for that, and things smooth out once we look at that. And so I'll show you graphically how that looks in just a little bit here. In terms of pay structure, and I want to set the foundation for tonight, but also maybe some future conversations that you're going to have to engage in as these times continue, that World at Work, which is our professional association in the compensation industry, does a survey every so often, a little bit more frequently lately. And one of the many questions, and I'm just going to focus on the top two lines here, is where do we build our structure? And up until about 3 years ago, about 90% of organizations, the median market, that was the nice sweet spot to build your pay structure. The last couple of years, it's kind of dropped off a little bit. And more organizations are looking at it saying, maybe we need to be a little bit more aggressive given what we're dealing with. And so as we look at that, and I want to make certain as we start talking about percentages and percentiles, it can get pretty confusing pretty quickly. When we talk about the 50th percentile marketplace, what that means is half of the employers are going to pay more than you, half are going to pay less. As an employer, the only numbers you ever hear about are those that are paying more than you. I mean, those are the ones that our employees are paying attention to, your departments are. I understand it, I get it. But mathematically, half should also be paying less. Those other numbers up there, the 10th, the 25th, 75th, and 90th, those are the data points we would expect to see in most of the surveys. What is the 10th percentile? What is that number that 90% of organizations are going to be paying more, that we can maybe build the bottom of a pay structure for a performance-based plan? 25th percentile is usually the bottom for a step plan. And same with the top, 75th percentile is usually the top for a step, and 90th percentile, the top for a performance. So with your structure, arguably, if it was set at the 50th percentile, that because it's a hybrid structure, steps to the control point and then performance thereafter, that your pay plan should bottom out right around the 25th percentile of the marketplace. So bringing people in a little bit on the lower end of the market, getting them to a market rate, And then as they progress and continue to perform, and hopefully continue to perform at a positive level and contribute, that you are willing to pay up to the 90th percentile of the market for people who reach those milestones. Perfectly acceptable. I would say we've seen that, dozens and dozens of times over in our work. But the other point I want to make with this, because I think it's important, is that when we build these rates, people often look at that midpoint or control point and say, that's the market rate for my job. I wish it was, and I sincerely hope it is, but also knowing that if I get 10 surveys, again, I'll pick on the job of accountant, I could get 10 different market rates. And so our job, and what we spend every single day of every single week, it seems like lately, trying to figure out what is the best approximation of the market for that particular role based on analysis, based on our experience. And so what I like to say is not so much that the midpoint is the market rate, but that grade to which that job is assigned is the appropriate market grade for that job, or the appropriate market range. And I think that sometimes helps, our preference is to see that market rate that we've arrived at somewhere in the top, plus or minus 5% of that midpoint. That's ideal. If it's a little bit more, a little bit less, we're not going to lose a lot of sleep. But that's what we're talking about when we start talking about some of these percentages and percentiles. So the first pass here, I just want to, as we're going through here and what you're seeing, this is if you're building a structure solely on the 50th percentile. I probably should have on here in bold, this is not our recommendation. This doesn't follow your prior approach, but this is what it would look like. If I do the 50th percentile plus the 10%, these are the numbers, and these are the numbers that Misty and Sarah have been working through for their costing options. I'll get to turn this over to them towards the end of this for their planning purposes. And again, as we get towards the end here, I'll show you kind of how that lines you up with the marketplace, because looking at this doesn't do much, except for here's a bunch of numbers on the page that I can look at after the fact. So I talk about alternative approaches. I already talked about a lot of this in terms of, why are we looking at alternative approaches in this marketplace? Because data gets old, and it gets old pretty quickly now. The other factor, and I think this is also an important thing to at least identify, is that in most of the comparable pools that we're building for our public sector clients, that there's a large percentage of those who are either actively engaged in their own compensation studies or are preparing to do their own compensation work in the very near term. The reason why I mention that is because we could get done here and your market could shift almost overnight. And so making certain that you're putting yourself in a position where you can reasonably compete out of the blocks is important to us. I like doing this work. I like seeing my clients' faces. I just don't like having them do unnecessary work. And so if we can help you make the right decision up front, we'll certainly do so. And so, again, just a message in terms of why, and I kind of talked a lot about that as relates to where we're asking clients to maybe look at the blend of the 50th and 75th percentile market data. And again, I don't know if it's the next slide or not, but I think from a approach standpoint, your approach is going to do almost exactly the same thing. So just putting some numbers out here, that the gray line, and this is without the 10% added, so we're just looking purely at the 50th percentile marketplace, your current rates. You can see that your current midpoints, as we saw in the other chart, were above the market. The black line, your current midpoints, gray line, the marketplace. The green line is the 75th percentile. It's just kind of a reference point, and then that blue line being that blend of those two numbers. If I add some numbers on top of it, so if I look at your current midpoints, and then I look at the median marketplace, the data that we have, and I put some options out here only for the sake of one of them for the sake of just conversation. The 50th, 75th blend plus the 10%, that's a pretty aggressive move. And I would say a pretty expensive move. It's not recommended, but again, I think if we were to look at it and say, if we were to do this, how would we line up? I at least wanted to be able to show you. What I do like is that the green line being the 75th percentile and the yellow line being the median marketplace plus 10% are doing essentially the same thing. It's putting you in a position where I think, you're able to compete with some of the similarly sized employers in the labor market. I think it puts you in a position that as some of these other studies come online and are finally adopted in the next couple of months or very first part of 2023, that will have a disruption, and we fully expect inflation to settle in for a few more months, if not a little bit longer. So I have zero reservations whatsoever about taking your existing approach, taking the median market, adding 10% to those values, and then adopting it. I think puts you in a position to compete and not having to go back at this as soon as you're done. So from that standpoint, it really then creates some questions, I think, in terms of challenges, which nobody, including us, likes readopting a new wage schedule. And the reason for that is it creates a whole bunch of challenges. Necessary challenges, but still challenges. So the first one is that you're always dealing with budget. I can't, ever since probably the year 2000, I can't think of a good time when I've seen an easy budget in any public sector entity I've worked with. Some might be easier than others, but not so much easy. And we're always battling with this notion of fairness versus happiness. I learned it when I was a young kid in the HR world, and I had to relearn it as a consultant, that I can't make people happy. I love it when I do make people happy, but I think what we pride ourselves on, that we try to help our clients arrive at approaches that are fair, that aren't discriminatory, that aren't playing favorites or what have you, or trying and allowing an organization to do as much as they can with as little as they have, or as much as they have. So the two challenges we see with implementing, and I'll just make certain that you're aware of this, because I think the approaches you're trying to take are trying to account a little bit for both, that the size of the increase is oftentimes a barrier. Especially when you are in those step ranges, the traditional way of implementing those is we will move you to the step in the new structure that provides an increase. Well, if I'm getting paid $25 an hour today, and the step in the new structure that provides an increase is a penny, my pay goes up to $25.01. 5 years ago, I could have that conversation with an employee, but hey, look at the long-term wage growth that you had that you didn't have before. That doesn't resonate as well in today's labor market. And so, what is a minimum percentage increase to make certain that employees are getting a wage increase in a tight fiscal time? But the other one, and this is even more difficult to not understand, but to communicate at times, is length of service is incredibly difficult to fully recognize, and by way of your practices, it's not something that you've placed the most emphasis on. The top end and the largest wage increases through that structure are based on performance. And so length of service isn't that only metric, but when we start talking about that, it oftentimes just falls off the table, if only for the notion of budget. That if, I'll use an example, I'm using manufactured numbers here, but if your wage structure would cost 4% to implement based on the step provides an increase, you can usually expect that number to be 3 to 4 times greater to base on everyone's years of experience. And so again, that's why it falls off the table pretty quickly. I oftentimes hear departments, employees, councils, boards say, we'll deal with this and we'll deal with the exceptions after that. Thank you, consultant, you made your recommendation, now you can go home, now we'll deal with the reality of it. I get that. I just caution you that when you make exceptions, we think we've got this tied out where it's equitable and would pass the smell test if anyone were investigating it for purposes of pay equity purposes. Exceptions can erode that pretty quickly. Now, there will be exceptions that will be necessary from time to time. Market is probably one of those. I forget if Sarah's called me, but I've had any number of clients call me over the years. We can't hire a streets laborer to save our life. What's the market going? I don't care what the job evaluation score is. We need to have this. Corrections officer right now is another one of those that we're seeing a lot of activity. Engineers, accountants. So there are exceptions that are necessary, but We also know that sometimes it's a matter of who speaks the loudest, who speaks most frequently. If I go back 4 or 5 times, eventually they'll have to say yes. I just put that out there as a caution, that you can take a pay structure off the rails pretty quickly when you do the one-off exceptions. So for us, and my last slide, and I'll turn it over to Sarah, is we want to make certain that we're aligning with your own strategy. And I think that's really coming in where your philosophy has been, and what we're recommending you continue is that you know that you probably need to pay a little bit more in the marketplace to compete in the environment in which you exist. And the equitable and competitiveness, I think we've laid that out over the course of time from the internal equity standpoint. Competitiveness, we're trying our darndest to make certain that you have a structure that is indeed that. We talk about supporting employees through a pay structure. You're doing that through 2 different ways. One, as an employee contributes more, has an outstanding year, has, or a series of years, you're allowing them to move through that structure based on a performance basis. But also, as jobs change, get created, or somebody leaves and you shuffle duties around, that as an employee says, well, if I'm taking this on, it feels like I'm doing a different job. And Sarah, let me call Carlson Detman, let me have that job reevaluated and see where it's placed. And again, you can support your employees through that sort of approach as well. It's hard to talk about compensation without talking about benefits. This was not the purpose of this process, but we also have to be aware that those are 2 parts of the equation, equally important. And I would throw employee engagement and culture as being that 3rd leg of that stool that you have to work on. I know Sarah does a lot with that. Legally sound, we talk about affordable. I don't get to be the judge of whether or not it's affordable, but we talk a lot about that in leading up to this. And then understandable, hopefully something that I said tonight made sense. And then this notion of auditing it regularly, that as things continue to tick along, I would say that the advice we've given to clients over the years is that in relatively calm economic times, every 4 or 5 years is probably enough to go back through and measure the marketplace. If things remain turbulent, as they have been, every 2 to 3 years is probably a more important metric just to make certain you're staying on top of the market. The best way to kind of fend that off, and something that you've been doing, is making, that if we're going to make certain that we're putting employee compensation, near the top of our list for at least consideration in our conversations. And so I think as long as that stays in place, and if you keep doing what you're doing, you're in decent standing. Sarah and I were talking before, I just delivered a project last week where they were 23% behind the market. I have no idea how they're going to catch up. Zero. In today's marketplace, in today's tax environment, it's going to be a very steep hill to climb. You're in a much better position than that. So I went pretty quickly through this. I have a lot of hidden slides in here that I didn't address to your benefit, but happy to answer any questions you might have. And I know you have some things you probably want to talk about too.
Yeah, so if you want to ask Patrick any questions, and then we'll get into our piece on the implementation, and you don't need to stay for that unless you'd like to.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wondered that way.
Yeah.
Are there any questions from the other people on the committee? I'll just say that I thought that was a fantastic presentation, really understandable, really thorough, pre-answered a lot of the questions that were coming up as you went. So
I might have heard a couple of those in advance.
yeah, and if you know me, they all know me. I usually have 1,000 questions. So very good presentation. Anything from Alder Rutherford, Alder Maldonado?
Julia's got her hand up.
Go ahead, Julia.
Yeah, so I think it was a great presentation. I want to ask a question. Okay, so what is the final recommendation? I want to understand, what is your summary? What is, I want to be sure that I understand correctly.
The question is, what is your final recommendation? So is it
My final recommendation is to build your structure on the median 50th percentile marketplace, but keep that 10% add-on that you have traditionally done. And so that would be, as we hand off the presentation, I can't see. Oh wait, I took my glasses off, that's why I can't see. That would be on slide 34 when this gets sent off.
And that's the same as the 75th percentile? Or essentially the same?
Just by pure happenstance, yes.
Yeah.
And I just want to add a note that this is the same structure that was approved back in 2014 by the Personnel Committee too. It was the 50th percentile plus the 10%. So we would kind of still be sticking with the same structure that we have already in place.
Go ahead, Julia.
So my other question is when we are planning to implement that, we are implementing this to all the pay grades or when it's going to be effective if we approve this?
Yeah, the effective date, you're asking about the effective date for the pay increases? Right, Julia? Yes, that would be the first full pay period following January 1. That's our target.
Subject to council approval.
Of course, subject to council approval in November, of course. But this was part of the mayor's proposed budget.
So this information is already included in the budget.
Correct. This is already included in the mayor's proposed budget. The full cost to implement the 50th percentile plus the 10%.
And so you're going to walk after Patrick?
Yeah,
you're
we'll
gonna
walk you
through
through.
the specifics.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
I don't think we have anything else for Patrick.
I'm curious what you have to say. I'm dealing with this all the time, so I'm curious.
Yeah, you can stay. I'm going to share my screen now with a document that I think will be helpful for viewers at home. You can unplug it. Okay, can everybody see the document up on the screen?
Yes.
All right, so some of the elders here in the chambers has a copy in front of them, but basically we kind of just started out with the current structure, so everything that Patrick just shared with you about how we are currently set up at the 50th percentile plus the 10%. I wanted to kind of walk through the challenges. Why are we here today? What led up to this market update in the first place? So we have had a challenging time recruiting for positions. Our hiring range of step 1 through step 5 or step 6 has been under market and severely under market because we've never had a full market update since the implementation of the brand new plan in 2014. We've also had large groups of employees that have been ineligible for merit increases, and they've been at the maximum of the pay range. Those are public works maintenance workers, police sergeants, police lieutenants, and even custodians. So they've only been getting cost of living adjustments every year. So from those challenges, we asked Carlson to perform this market poll, and the results of the market update include more competitive hiring ranges, and now all of our employees will be eligible for merit increases in 2023. For a merit-based pay system, that is very important, that everybody is eligible for those merit-based pay increases. One classification was moved up to a higher pay grade from the market poll, and that's our public works maintenance workers with the CDL, the commercial driver's license. That position was severely under the market. Any employees or people with CDLs are in high demand right now, and you can find that many employers are paying higher wages for that type of position. So that did move up one pay grade higher. We also created a public works lead worker. So we're trying to have some promotional opportunities within public works, because right now we have one classification of maintenance workers and then supervisors. We have no opportunity for internal employees to gain experience and be potentially prepared to take on a supervisor role in the future. So we added a public works lead worker into pay grade F, which is one pay grade higher than the maintenance worker with CDL. We also, the original structure of the pay plan had a mechanic that was always one pay grade higher than the maintenance worker, so that just automatically moved up one pay grade to pay grade F. And then we also created a classification of police telecommunicator lead worker, so yet another opportunity within the police telecommuting dispatch office to be able to promote and have a lead worker in that unit. That position won't necessarily be reclassed right away. We have to be able to have the funds in the budget to be able to reclass that person. But the public works lead worker, one in streets, one in parks, and one in utility, was part of the mayor's proposed brand new positions for 2023. And then just to highlight, the percent increase ranges between the pay grades are anywhere from 22% to 13%. And you're going to notice the lower pay grades have the higher percentages. So it's our employees in the lower pay grades that are seeing the highest percentage increases. There are most employees in the higher level pay grades are seeing a minimum of a 3% increase. So everyone, all city employees in the non-represented pay plan will see at least a 3% pay increase. It's just those that are in the lower pay grades or within the steps of their pay grade that are seeing the higher percentages. Because remember, from step 1 to step 6, our hiring range, step 1 to step 5 is under the market, and it's been severely under the market. So that's why if an employee is within the steps, they're going to see a larger percentage increase. Your longer-term employees who've been here and are in the pay for performance are already making more than the market or higher than the median. So if you kind of scroll down, we talk about an implementation procedure and how individual employees are affected. Because you might be wondering, well, how is a newer employee, how does this impact them versus a longer-term employee? So what the city would do, and this is along the lines of the same structure that was approved back in 2014, is we would look at an employee, we would identify the number of years in their position, and then they would move to the new pay plan that ensures at least a 3% increase and also matches their years in the position. So this isn't years total with the city if someone made a transfer or promoted into a different position, but years in position. So somebody who has 2 years of experience, as long as it's a 3% increase for them, we're going to move them into step 2 of the updated pay plan. So everyone at least will see that 3% increase, but that is how we are determining which step that employee moves into. And if they're already in the pay for performance and they've been here, for example, 9 years, they're going to just see a straight 3%. But then they're eligible for merit increases, so they could potentially see up to a 2% merit increase in 2023. Because that is part of the proposed budget too, is that there's a 1% pay for performance, but for evaluations with a score of 4 or more, it's up to a 2% increase. So you'll see here how individual employees are affected. So we thought hopefully this might be helpful for viewers at home too, that you have a new employee with less than 5 years of experience. You have a longer term employee with there's a greater than 5 years, excuse me. So I put kind of a little scenario based on the updated pay plan for you. So we're looking at someone in pay grade A, so right at the bottom of the pay grade, and potentially their current pay is $17.37 per hour. Now, they have 2 years in the position. We're going to move them to step 2 of the updated pay plan. That is going to result in a 15.5% pay increase for them, effective in January. And then they're still eligible for merit increases at their anniversary. That's a very large increase. Now you look at a longer-term employee, somebody who's currently at the maximum of the pay range, in pay grade A, for example, is at $22.85 per hour. Now remember, if they're at the max of the pay range, they're making more than what the market, they're higher than the market, so they're getting paid more than what other employers are paying. The employee's been in the position for 9 years, and they'll receive that straight 3% increase, and they'll move to $23.54 per hour. It's a 3% increase for them. But the reason that newer employees see such a larger increase is because they're still within the steps. They've been, and those steps are so under market. So, and then they're still eligible for a merit increase on their anniversary. So we've had a few questions from employees who are aware of the market poll and the results with this. And I wanted to share kind of frequently asked questions with this implementation. I have heard from some longer term employees that are like, well, I only get a 3%, but this person started 2 years ago and they're getting a 15% increase. How is that fair? Remember, it's all about how those steps are built. They're under market. They're paid under market right now and have been. Whereas the long-term employee has been paid over market, so they are in a competitive pay rate. So that's why it's just a 3% increase for the longer-term employees. And so that goes on to the next question. What about my total years with the city of Fitchburg? I've had employees where they've promoted, they've changed departments, changed positions. why aren't you counting all my years? Because if you count all my years, I should be at step 6 versus step 1. So we are really only looking at the position because each position is in its specific pay grade. And if we're looking at bringing in new hires based on that pay grade and that years of experience in that position, we want that consistency there. So we are truly only looking for the number of years in that position. And we don't have a whole lot of employees in that boat. I mean, it's very minimal. And when is the city going to go through a brand-new pay plan update? We hope potentially to redo the point factor system with, whether it's Carlson Detman or another consultant to redo the pay plan and go through that. So that's a matter of updating all job descriptions, and they have job description questionnaires, and then they go through a point factor system to identify their total points so that they can put them in specific pay grades. So it's a process we have to budget for. And then I've had the last question, will I receive a COLA, a cost of living adjustment for 2023? There was a COLA built into the wage lift, so there's not going to be an additional COLA on top of the 3% minimum pay increase. So I hope this document provides is helpful at least. Sometimes it's nice to have a visual. But any questions at all about the implementation? And Chad, if you have anything you'd like to offer, please.
I think both Patrick and you have summarized it very well. Thank you. I just want to, I guess, reiterate what's been said here, and that we took an approach that was very similar, if not identical, to what had been done by the Personnel Committee in the city as a whole back in 2014 when this plan was implemented. We really wanted to demonstrate to our employees our commitment to those who have been here through keeping the market, our compensation at that 10% level above the midpoint, and also recognizing the fact that we want to be able to recruit and retain talented employees here. So I think that the proposal that you see before you now and that has been included in the mayor's proposed budget for 2023 is one that is very good. It does recognize what the market is currently doing, and it responds to what the market is doing appropriately, also with an eye on what the total cost is and the impact on our taxpayers.
So just before we get back into the details of this, for the future, you talked about regular auditing of this pay. Obviously, we could totally rebuild the pay structure in the future, but in terms of this current pay structure, this update, how often would we be auditing this going forward?
So when you say auditing, we could have positions studied. We could have 5 or 10 positions studied every year as part of the auditing to make sure they're in the right pay grade, so that we're not 5 years from now having to redo all of this all over again. So we could identify that we're going to set aside a certain amount of positions to be studied and redone with the updated job descriptions, updated point factor. Would that be your recommendation, Carlson or Patrick?
So when we talk, what I towards the end of my conversation here this evening, it's evening now, right? That in a hot marketplace, going back and revisiting the marketplace every 2 to 3 years, in a slower marketplace every 4 to 5, that's part of the audit function. I would say that you're engaged in part of that. Mm-hmm. Jobs changed, let's have it reevaluated. We do have a handful of clients who have taken it a step further, where we're going to do every 3 years, every 4 years, we're going to do a third or a quarter of our jobs each and every year just to make certain that they are where they are. I have one large utility client that's exactly what we do, and half the jobs they're just fine, that nothing's changed, and others, no, we need to go through and reevaluate. But then when you get to the end of that cycle, then it's time to plot in new market data and bring those two things together all over again. So every 3-4 years, 2 of our clients are doing exactly that. It's not for everybody, but for those, in highly competitive industries, and I would say the utility sector is incredibly challenging, and making sure that things are aligned that way. So you can take different approaches to auditing. I think you're doing a really good job of at least staying on top of the jobs as they change. You're not letting somebody sit there for 2 or 3 years without consideration of the evaluation. 6 months is probably fine, to be honest, that you want to make certain that the duties that they've absorbed are going to stick with them. You know, in fact, we have a couple clients who say that you have to be performing the new duties for, you know, at least 9 months, if not a year, before it gets reevaluated. Again, from the standpoint of, you know, sometimes you create a new position. I think this is what the duties are, but I'm not certain. But so regular, you know, making certain the jobs stay up to date and testing the marketplace. And I would say the best measure is asking HR, asking your departments in terms of the recruitment and retention activity. When it starts slipping a little bit, that's probably your first indicator that maybe it's time to go back and retest. Unfortunately, that's a little bit more frequent nowadays than it has been in past years.
So going forward, assuming that this is adopted, going forward, it's piecemeal based on positions until the point when we might completely rebuild the pay
You got
structure.
it, exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Anything else from the? Go ahead, Alder Rutherford.
So I don't know if this question is for now or is for next week. How much this is going to impact our budget? You know, how much is the number?
Yep, so included in the mayor's proposed 2023 budget includes the implementation plan that Sarah laid out. So the plan that was recommended and then the implementation being whatever step you should be based on longevity with a minimum of a 3% increase. So that's included in the budget already. We don't have to find that money as we go through that process. And then rough numbers, because things are of course changing every time somebody gets an evaluation. The change from last year to this implementation plan for just this section of the budget is 6.5%. So it really helped that we had pretty good net new construction. We had a couple other things that turned out in our favor. And frankly, the mayor said that this was one of his highest priorities. So we put that in first. So it is a large percent increase, $700,000.
I guess since we have Patrick here, are you seeing? Obviously, there's a lot of things going on. Are you seeing other public sector? Like since you deal with public sector, are you seeing a lot of public sector units kind of taking this type of action?
Yeah, I mean that's the hardest thing to see right now because it's a lot of sacrifices are having to be made because of that. You know, if you look at, you know, it's not just wages that are increases, asphalt, rolled salt, paper clips, paper, fuel, you name it, everything is increasing. So your city administrator and finance and you as council members have your work cut out for you in putting that together. But yeah, I would say not only are we seeing more action, but I would say with the exception of a couple, that they are even going forward and adopting the more aggressive placement in the marketplace because of what they are seeing from a recruitment and retention standpoint. But it does result in probably more prioritization from a budgetary standpoint than has been necessary in very recent memory. Probably more akin to 2008, 2009 timeframe, 2010.
It sounds like you've already introduced this to staff. I'm just curious about the process of, was it department to department? Was there kind of a large meeting?
Yeah, so implementation. So we did share this with all staff, so all the non-represented staff. So we didn't send this out to union employees. So we included the proposed, what was included in the mayor's proposed budget. We also, and attached to your packet, we have the hourly LT seasonal schedule and the paid on call, paid on premise schedule that we are hoping to update the minimum pay to at least $15 per hour. We worked closely with department heads who have those positions in their department to make sure that was going to work out for them if they were going to be able to afford that for some of their departments. But yeah, the communication, you know, we've tried to keep employees updated on kind of what's going on, what this might look like with the implementation. I went down to Public Works facility yesterday, met with the staff there, answer any questions that they have. So trying to, you know, keep open transparency, communication. We want people to ask questions, and you know, we're here for that.
Alder Rutherford, go ahead.
Yeah, when this project was finalized, when it was finalized?
Finalized so we got the results from Patrick probably a month and a half, 2 months ago,
So,
maybe?
end of July?
End of July.
So my question is because, why it's coming to personnel committee after 2 months? Why we didn't have this presentation like in our previous meeting?
Well, part of that is I was on FMLA, so I wasn't able to be here, and I really wanted to be here for this topic and make sure that I could speak to it and that we were prepared to. We had to kind of pull the numbers together, update the pay plan, to have that draft. So there was a lot of work. Once we get the numbers from Patrick, we still have to put everything together and get that communication out. So we needed more time.
If I may also, I'd like to add, in addition, staff needs time to assess all of the information and determine what the recommendations are and what the options could be, and most importantly, determine what the budget might accommodate. And that takes some time for all those numbers to come in. And in fact, we didn't have our health insurance number as we typically do until about September 15th. So until we have a lot of those numbers, we really don't know how much we can potentially afford. And that's why it seemed to make the most appropriate sense to bring a full recommendation to the Personnel Committee for your consideration rather than giving you a bunch of potential scenarios, some of which may not even be feasible depending upon how our financial picture looked.
The thing I'd like to add, if I may, is that the recommendation doesn't change any of the policy decisions made when the plan was originally developed. It still includes that 10%. It still includes the structure, the same that it was. So there's no new decisions that really need to be made or changed as a result of this recommendation. There's really that implementation piece that we needed to figure out.
Maybe, can I have another question?
Yeah, please go ahead.
I want to understand the process because maybe I am confused. So the personnel committee, we don't have to approve this because it's already in the budget. Our vote is symbolical if we have to do something, isn't it? I want to understand how is the process.
So I think your role today is to provide feedback and ideally to support the recommendation that has been provided. Obviously, as the three personnel committee members are all alders and part of the city council, your ultimate action will be considered during the budget process, and the council will formally act as a whole to either adopt the mayor's proposed implementation of this plan in accordance with what we've presented today, or you would vote to otherwise modify it through the amendment process.
I'm curious, I'd like to share thoughts, but I'm curious what the other council members think. But based on what I've read here today and what I've seen in terms of the implementation and the thoughts, I think this seems like a really good thing for the city. I think it's been well thought out. It's obviously in line with the recommendation. I'm happy that the recommendation is possible. Ideally, it would have been nice to have seen it prior, but I can understand the mitigating factors that led to this. But in some ways, it's nice to know that we can actually do this, and that matches the recommendation. And I do like the increased equity of this, where the lowest paid employees are being brought up the most percentage-wise. And I do like that there's that consideration, like Patrick was saying, about how current employees not getting much of a raise can cause, that can cause rough feelings, but everyone's getting a certain measure of raise that's still in line with the pay bands, and it still makes sense since it's not completely out of sync with what we're recommending anyway. So I'm pretty pleased with this, and I'm excited that it looks like we're going to be able to do it. I have to dig into the budget a little bit more. I haven't done that yet, but I'm interested to hear what the other alders think.
I don't have any new thoughts. I'm in support of it as well. It was a pretty clear explanation for why it's needed.
Yes, go ahead.
No, yeah. So I really, I am glad to see this. In my job, I am in charge of the staffing and recruitment for my team, and I have seen the same challenges that we are seeing in the public sector with with increases in rate, try to have a great balance between the people that the new market value from salary to the one that they're already in the company, is a very delicate balance to have, people, trying to retain people in the company and try to do what are the best thing that we can do to retain our employees. And, we have done a lot of things in the last couple of months because it has been crazy, the labor market. So, and I am glad that we are doing this for our employees. I am, 100 behind that. And I agree with Gabriela that I really like the equity pay components, because usually the people at the beginning of the low grades are sometimes the wages they get stuck there and there is no an adjustment to this salary. So, and I am glad to see that. I really believe in that equity pay adjustment. The issue that is going to be how the city could afford this in the future. You know what I mean? That one is a different conversation, maybe this one is going to be one of the priority of the city and the council. I am behind all those. I prefer, we are a service company. Our employees are our organization, and we need to retain. And I have seen, that it has been very challenging for us this year to retain employees and how costly it is to hire and recruit, and so I think we need to do something. And I think this is, one step to start to mitigate what happened this year with our staffing at the city. So I am glad that we are doing something, so to retain our employees and to pay what they're worth.
So every employee has a sense of the increase, and they actually have this.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so everyone knows the potential, assuming the budget passes
Exactly.
as is.
And they
Everyone
know
knows
that it hasn't formally passed. They know that there's a chance it could not pass in November. So it's just giving them a heads up of what to expect, that this was part of the mayor's proposed budget, and then trying to communicate that out to them. And so people have been stopping in to kind of learn more about what their specific individual pay increase will be, and happy to do that.
I'm hoping that maybe we might keep people if they know that a raise is
Yeah.
potentially coming in January.
Absolutely.
In the meantime.
And they get merit increases again. I mean,
Yes, that's huge for
Very
morale,
huge.
I have to imagine. Go ahead.
I'll also add, as part of the outreach that Sarah has done, is that this meeting was communicated with staff too, that there would be a presentation by the consultant here to explain the methodology and so forth, and that city staff would be presenting as well. So that was also another step that was taken to ensure that folks understood what was happening.
Great. And then in terms of interim recruitment up until January, we're obviously hiring a lot of positions. How is that functioning? Are we hiring people on the old pay band and maybe informing them that there may be an increase come January?
So we have that ability to potentially offer them on the new updated pay plan, but they wouldn't be eligible for another increase in January. So, for example, the IT director, we were able to place an offer that he will know tomorrow if he formally accepts, but we were able to give him the higher pay rate that would be expected in January.
Great. That's what we approved last time.
That's what was approved at the last
Great.
personnel committee, correct?
Good.
Yep.
All right. Anything else?
One other thing that I'll add, I know Sarah brought it up as well, but in your packet, I do want to reaffirm that we also made a commitment to all of our part-time and LTE employees to have the floor at $15 an hour. So that was another initiative that we talked about from an HR and finance perspective, again, to demonstrate commitment to our existing employees and also potentially recruit new LTEs and part-time employees by at least getting to that minimum rate of $15 an hour. So that is also something that is included in the budget, the mayor's proposed budget, and hopefully will be adopted as well as part of the overall compensation.
Great. Alder Rutherford, go ahead.
Yeah, another question, Chad or Misty. Are we incorporating an increase for bilingual employee too? I don't remember.
Yeah, that's exciting too. So part of the mayor's proposed budget for 2023 is a bilingual incentive. So 50 cents added for all hours worked to employees that pass the testing for being bilingual in either Spanish, Hmong, or American Sign Language, because those are the three predominantly spoken languages in Fitchburg. So we can adjust that policy as the years go on. But yeah, we're really excited that that was part of the mayor's proposed budget, as well as adding Juneteenth as a city recognized holiday.
All right, so I think we've answered all the questions, so we should take a vote on this, yes?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Great, so I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve the 22 market poll recommendation as included in the
Thank you. Hey, thank you. You did great.
mayor's proposed budget.
Second.
Go ahead, Alder Rutherford.
No, I'm going to vote.
Oh, great. All those in favor say aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you so much, Patrick. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Patrick.
So we'll go ahead and move on to item B, authorization to update title of police records clerk.
Yeah, so, motion.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can I have a motion? Motion to approve or?
So move.
Okay, all right. So we have submitted in the packet a police records clerk job description. I have Dana Schmidt here, who is the Police Administrative Services Manager and oversees the records team to help answer any questions that you have. But this has no fiscal impact. We're not looking at changing the pay grade of the police records clerk. We're only looking to change the title. We want to change it from police records clerk to police records specialist. It's more in line with what they are doing. They are truly specialists in records, what they can release, what they can't release, anything related to police records, that is their specialty. So we're just hoping to update that title to make it more reflective of the type of work that they're doing. Dana, did you want to add anything regarding the job title change?
No, just that they're doing a lot more things in these last few years that was not originally on their job duty list, things that are not necessarily things you would think a records clerk does, like back up the court liaison. They've now been tasked with having to learn how and do video redactions from body cam videos and squad videos. So that's quite the learning process that we're going through there. So they're doing a lot more high level things. They approve and deny records requests on their own now versus sergeants used to do that. They would gather the records request, they'd fulfill the records request. However, they weren't actually the ones to approve or deny the request. And currently now they are. So they have a lot more high level job duties that they're currently doing. And so in regards to that, we feel that their title should reflect the higher level of duties that they're doing.
This position, I assume, will be getting the pay raise come January, assuming it passes.
Absolutely. Yep. So all employees on the non-ROC pay plan will see a pay increase, including the records team.
I don't have any questions. Any questions from the committee? No? All right, I'll go ahead and take a vote. All those in favor of changing the title, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Visual aye from Alder Rutherford. The motion carries.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dana.
Thanks so much. Moving on to item C, authorization to roll out, sorry, go ahead.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I saw in the packet that it was, I don't know when we're going to discuss, it was part of the first item that we approved, the pay on call for the firefighters. That one was part of the first item in the agenda.
Yeah, that was included in there because we're also updating the paid on call, paid on premise firefighter pay to ensure that they're at a minimum of $15 per hour with all their certifications. So our goal is that all hourly seasonal LTE positions start at a minimum of $15 an hour. And with the firefighter, the paid on premise, Joe has it structured that they have to have all their certifications to then be at the $15 per hour. So the higher rate is a little bit lower for the paid on premise firefighters, but they can be at the $15 with all the certifications.
Okay. I know that is on now, and I forgot because I have question about this. I don't know if I can. We already closed that item, but
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we can allow it, yeah.
no. My question is, Sarah, how we done a comparative comparing the hourly rate to other municipality? You know, if we are our rate is the pay on call is comparable to other municipality our size. Have we done that?
We have not. So our goal this year was just to get them to that $15 to match the hourly seasonal LTE. We did not do a survey of other municipalities and what they were paying their volunteer firefighters. That is something that we would like to do. That is not part of something we did this year. So Carlson-Detman only looked at the non-rep pay plan. They didn't look at our hourly seasonal LTE or the paid on-premise firefighter wage schedule. So we have not compared it to other municipalities. We were trying to at least get them to that minimum 15.
But the minimum goes from 1467 to 15, isn't it?
Correct, 1467 to 15 with all the
Practically.
certifications.
So that one is the maximum amount that they can, with all the certification, $15 an hour?
Exactly.
Wow, wow. It's low. Okay.
Okay. We'll move on to item C, authorization to roll out a supplemental accident benefit for 2023 to Wisconsin Retirement System, WRS, eligible employees. And I'll go ahead and entertain a motion on that.
So move.
Perfect. So the Personnel Committee has to approve any brand-new benefits that we roll out to employees. And there is a benefit through the Employee Trust Funds, which administers our health insurance, our life insurance, disability, it would be 100% employee paid. It's completely voluntary, but an employee could sign up for what's called supplemental accident benefit. So if they get into a car accident and they shatter their knee and they break their arm, they would receive a lump sum payment to do whatever they want with. It can go into a savings account. It could be, they could use it to spend it on something. It doesn't have to go toward medical bills. This is something supplemental above and beyond that an employee would have to enroll in. Right now is open enrollment, so we just kicked that off this week. So the goal would be, if it's approved tonight, I'd love to send an email to all staff to say, if you're interested, you can enroll in this voluntary supplemental benefit. Again, there's no cost to the employer. It's 100% employee pay, but it's very affordable. In the packet, there's a listing of all the different reasons you could receive a lump sum payment. Now, it's accident. So if you have a scheduled knee replacement next year, that doesn't mean you can sign up for it this year and you're going to receive a lump sum. It's truly accident-based. So unpredictable, unforeseen. You get into a car accident, you fall off something, a ladder, and you break, something. Then that's when you would see that voluntary accident benefit. They also offer theft identity resources there too. So. And that's included in the cost. So it's a free benefit, not free. It's a good benefit that is a very minimal cost, that is voluntary, that employees can choose to sign up for. So since it's already administered through employee trust funds, we wanted to offer that benefit to our employees.
It seems like pretty relevant for some of the positions that work in the city. There's some serious potential accidents there. Julia, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. This is for accident that occur during the time that they're working, or they can be.
Workers' comp would cover anything on site. So if something happened to an employee who is here, workers' comp is going to pay for everything. They'll receive compensation while they're out. The accident, now that's a good question. I guess I didn't look into what happens if the accident happens while they're on work time. Workers' comp would, of course, fall in, but potentially the voluntary supplemental benefit could also kick in because you got into an accident. It doesn't matter whether you are on work time or not. Now you're also going to get a lump sum. I do believe that is the case. So even though workers' comp and your health insurance is going to cover it, you're also going to potentially receive a lump sum payment to help with whatever expenses you may have.
It's kind of like an AFLAC. You know what I mean? Like a work like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay. Do you think that employees are perceptive about this? It's something that it was asked by employees or use that, identify that benefit?
We did a benefit survey back in 2020 of our employees to see what types of benefits they would be interested in receiving. I only had a couple at that time mention the voluntary supplemental benefits like AFLAC. I think we had Allstate at one time. But given that Employee Trust Funds is administering this program, and it would be pretty simple for us to get employees to get a pay code in our system and get this all set up on an administration level, we wanted to at least offer this opportunity for our employees.
Yeah, in the Q&A in the brochure, it says accident insurance provides a lump sum payment directly to you regardless of income, expenses incurred, or other insurance coverage.
Yep.
So I would assume that it would be on top of workman's comp.
Exactly.
Well, that'd be good to clarify.
Yeah,
For
exactly.
anyone ready to elect.
Yep.
All right, any other questions? Go ahead and take a vote. All in favor of approving this rollout, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Visual aye from Alder Radefrada. Motion carries. Moving on to the next item, Public Works Recruitment Update.
Yeah, so we'll have the Public Works Director posted by the end of this week, so we're just putting some finalizing touches on that job posting. We had Paul Woodard start with us this week on Tuesday. He is one of our former Public Works Directors who is helping us out in the interim as we have a vacancy for our Assistant Director of Public Works. So we are going to wait on filling the Assistant DPW until our DPW is on, our Director of Public Works is on board so that they can be part of that recruitment process. I also want to just provide an update on other public works vacancies. We have a transportation engineer that's posted and we're accepting applications for, and then we have an engineering technician opening, and we do have a handful of applications in for that one, so we can start to schedule some interviews. So those are our current public works vacancies. On the maintenance side, we do have a maintenance worker that's open, and they just held interviews and are going to be bringing 3 people back for second interviews, which is great news. So hopefully that position will be filled. But I know that there's been a lot of questions about public works in general and all the open positions. So I just wanted to add that to the agenda today and answer any questions you might have about any of the vacancies.
Do you anticipate offering the new pay band for the transportation engineer as they come on?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it'll, definitely change maybe who is interested in the position or not, because the hiring ranges on this new pay plan are just so substantially higher that it's actually very competitive, and I think they're very attractive.
Great. Is there been any discussion of, since there's been quite a lot of vacancy, there seems like there's an extra salary budgeted that's not being used. Is there been any discussion about providing consultants or picking up some of the slack with that extra budget?
We are already doing that with some of our development-related projects and other construction projects that are going on. In particular, we had one of our engineers out on sabbatical leave, and we hired consultants to pick up all the projects that person was working on as well. So, and then obviously, one of the reasons we hired Paul Woodard on a part-time basis was to also help manage a lot of our development-related projects and our water utility projects as well, and any other general engineering tasks that we could use some assistance with in the interim. And his wage is being funded utilizing the vacant Assistant Public Works Director position at this point in time.
Go ahead, Alder Radefrada.
Yeah, so I want to make a comment. Do you have any idea how much it's going to cost the city additional in hiring all these consultants to cover all of these, vacancies? Because, it's great that we can outsource some of this work, to consultant, but consultant are charging us average $150 to $200 an hour, I imagine. So that one is also, affecting our budget, and I would like to see how much all of these hiring of outsourced consultants to cover vacancies have. What is the impact, economic impact, or financial impact in our budget? I don't know if you keep track of that or Mystic keep track of that number.
We can check with the Public Works Director and see if he's able to identify that. And you are correct, Alder, in that, outside consultants are likely going to cost more per hour than city staff completing similar work. And of course, we would prefer to do as much of that work in-house as possible, but considering the current staffing situation in the engineering department, we've been left with little choice but to do the outsourcing at this point in time in order to keep at least the high priority projects with some measure of forward movement. And as far as overall budget impact, the budget is set, and absent a budget amendment that's approved by council, we're not going to be able to deviate from what had been previously approved. So we are basically only utilizing existing funding unless we have come to council to request approval of a formal budget amendment to authorize additional funding for outside consultants. So a bit of a long answer to stating that the bottom line is not necessarily affected by the use of consultants because we are using previously budgeted funds that had been identified for staff positions and having to keep the consultants' hours within the available funding.
So,
Can I add something?
go ahead.
I agree with you, Chad, but eventually, it's going to be a point where, the consultant expenses are going to cross what we have budgeted from these wages, you know what I mean? So I think we can sustain something like this in the short term, but I don't think that it's going to be viable if we need to go like 6-8 months with consultants, you know what I mean? So at one point, consultants are going to be more expensive, it's going to request a budget amendment, if we don't, I'm going to give you an example. For next year, we have 2 big projects for road construction, Tyne and Lacey Road. And if we don't be able to recruit a traffic engineer by January, February, so that one is going to be, we need to hire consultants to start working on, in the project. So, you know what I mean? So my concern is eventually we are going to run out of funds from those, buckets, and so I want to be sure that, I want to be curious to see how much, we are spending in consultant to cover all those vacancies.
Yeah, we'll look to get that number, and I completely understand and agree with your perspective on at some point in time the money wouldn't be there depending on how long the vacancies go if we're using consultants to do staff work. I do want to remind you, and I know you're aware of it, that any of those significant reconstruction projects, be it Fish Hatchery Road, be it Sign Road, be it Lacey Road, we're already outsourcing a lot of the construction design and management of those particular large projects just because staff doesn't have the capacity to do that work. We obviously have, in a case of a road reconstruction project, a city engineer will be working very closely with the outside consultants on those sorts of projects to ensure that they're aligning with the goals that the city and the priorities that the city and its council have set for that particular project. But it would be extremely difficult for a department our size to be able to manage the significant number of projects from design to completion without the use of outside consultants. So in the case of Sign and Lacey Roads in particular, all or a portion of those reconstruction projects are obviously being funded via the TID in those particular areas and or other costs or other funds. And again, those consultants are already built into those projects when they're presented to the council right from the get-go.
Great. I am curious, though, on the flip side, given the vacancies, which is unfortunate, I'm curious if there's any opportunities for us to hire one-time consultants to catch us up before the end of the year. And I'd be happy to entertain a budget amendment and council to do that if it kind of frees up some of this, because I know this is probably stressful for that staff. And can we turn this into a positive, those vacancies into a positive?
Yeah, we can certainly look at that, and one of the things in which we hired Paul Woodard was also to provide that staff capacity to be able to take a lot of the development stuff that was being spread across multiple engineers, which is affecting their ability to do the main role of their particular duty, for instance. He is able to begin, he started yesterday, to start to take a lot of that capacity for development-related items from the existing staff so that they can hopefully focus their time and talents on other projects that they're expected to be working on or other just daily engineering responsibilities that they have. So we have already started to basically do that through the use of hiring Paul on a part-time basis. As you may know, I think in the email that was shared with council, he is recently retired as a public works director in the city of Janesville and spent 23 years as public works director here in Fitchburg. So he has great familiarity with the city and its processes and its expectations, and obviously great and very deep experience that he's bringing to basically a consultant type role. Except that he's really been hired as a part-time employee at what I would consider to be a rate significantly less than what a consultant would have charged us to come in here in the, I guess, open market, so to speak.
That's great that he's willing to come in to do that. That's amazing. Great. Anything else? So we can move on to our item 5, announcements.
Yeah, I wanted to share with you a listing of the new positions that were part of the mayor's proposed budget. So up on the screen, for those two at home who aren't aware, so we've got the Director of Administrative Services. So some of these positions you're actually going to see again personnel because you're going to be approving wherever they fall into the pay grade. So Director of Administrative Services is a brand new department head level position. So you'll see this again if it gets adopted, of course, by council in November. We're going to be looking for more election assistants, a brand new accountant in finance, another police sergeant, and then in the fire department, a full-time division chief of prevention and inspection. We'll be looking for another code enforcement officer. We hopefully will have a lead worker, that's that public works lead worker in streets, utility, and parks. We're looking to increase the senior LTE hours, recreation referees, and then adding a utility maintenance worker, and lastly, a brand new IT position, which doesn't happen very often. So IT applications and systems administrator. So this is an incredible list, and we look forward to bringing some of these that are brand new positions back to personnel to approve where they fall in the pay grade so that we can start recruitment, again, pending full council approval in November.
If I could add just a clarification on the code enforcement position, that is actually in the building inspection department, and their primary focus would be to look at code compliance, complaints and or issues in our neighborhoods and throughout the community, and then also ideally work towards certification to become a building inspector as well if they don't happen to have that skill set already when they come along into the city. But I want to reiterate, in addition to that market pull we've talked about earlier in this meeting and the implementation of that market pull to address our compensation of our employees, the positions that the mayor has included in his proposed budget are noteworthy and significant, and they touch a lot of different departments because there are a lot of different departments in the city that are really struggling from a capacity issue. And I know you guys have probably heard the word staff capacity come out of my mouth a lot in the last 14 months in which I've been in this role, but I honestly can't feel like I can overuse that terminology enough because many departments are over capacity based upon what they have for available personnel resources, and quite honestly get the work done that they get done through their commitment and dedication and extra hours that they put in that they're probably not even putting on their time cards, to be honest with you. So these positions really do address some serious capacity needs throughout the entire city. They are a recruitment and retention piece as well. Obviously, if staff do not feel supported, either in compensation or in workload, they are more likely to leave, or if we're seeing a significant amount of turnover, they might not even be interested in us as an employer from a recruitment standpoint, because if they're doing their due diligence, which I hope they are, they have an idea of what they're going to get when they come to the city of Fitchburg. And you'll see some positions, be it the Director of Administrative Services, the lead workers in streets, utilities, and parks, the IT position. Those positions are also positions not only to address capacity issues and provide us with additional personnel capacity, but they're also additional opportunities for leadership and career development and growth and creating career ladders within many of our departments, so that when we do get employees in here, one of the common things that we hear is, I can be here for 25 years and I'm not interested in becoming a department head, for instance, so there's nothing else for me to do. So then they're going to look at other employment options that might at least allow them a 1 or 2 career progression opportunities. So these are things that we've all, heard from our employees, we've heard from our department heads that we're really trying to address moving forward in this budget. And again, as Sarah mentioned, if these positions are approved through the budget process, a number of them will come back through the Personnel Committee because they are new, specifically some of the ones I just called out, those lead workers, the IT position, and Director of Administrative Services, and to a certain extent, the building inspection position could be as well, from what I recall. So there would certainly be an opportunity for the Personnel Committee to weigh in on the implementation of those positions and what their job duties and responsibilities look like and where they're placed on pay schedules. So I want to at least add that information.
And so I assume the department heads will go through this at the Finance Committee meetings next week, though?
Yes,
Each one
absolutely.
will talk about
Yep,
these
you'll
new
hear from all the
positions.
department heads on any brand new positions they're promoting. Yep.
Okay. Oh, go ahead, Alder Rutherford.
To make a yes, so thank you, Chad, for clarifying some of this. I want to mention something that I repeated last year. Sometimes I think we are putting the cart in front of the horse. You know what I mean? And because we are I don't know. I think we are. We are seeing all these new positions created and put it in the budget. We never have a discussion in personnel committee in advance. It's like kind of like a surprise. We open the budget and we see all these new positions, but we never had the opportunity to discuss and determine what are the priorities and the needs. Because the other option, the other moment that we had to discuss that during budget time, and I think I hope maybe when we have a staffing plan in place for this city, we are going to have a better process to vet all these new positions, because because now the list is there are a lot of positions, and I don't disagree that that there is a capacity issue and some departments are totally they need more people. I am not going to disagree on all of that. What I am disagreeing is the process. I think we should have be notified in advance that all these positions, all these new positions were coming through the budget. So I think we have we can discuss in person and have I don't know, recommendation. You can get our feedback. But it's like what happened last year with the assistant position to public works. You know what I mean? I think we should have more time here in the personnel committee to discuss a new position, or at least, to have an idea those positions are going to be incorporated in the budget. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I don't disagree that that we need those positions. I don't know. We need to determine what is the need. But I know that there is a capacity issue. Yes, I know that. I am not going to disagree. What I am disagree is how to improve this process that there are no surprise edit budget. By the way, we need to approve this new 10 position. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And I want to your question to you is when we are going to see a staffing plan? If we are working on a staffing plan, what is I want to have an idea if for 2023, we are going to have a staffing plan in place.
That will be our goal. In fact, Sarah and I have just been talking in the last 2 weeks about getting the RFP ready to go for to go out for that staffing plan and organizational study. And it would be our hope that that RFP goes out, say, within the next 30 to 60 days. And ultimately, we have a final product that it would be delivered back to the city. I would say, ideally no later than July 1st of 2023. I think that hopefully will be a reasonable goal, particularly if we can get that RFP out yet before the new year starts and get that contract awarded to a consultant early next year at the latest. I would think 5 to 6 months should be an adequate time to develop that level of a staffing plan. So to your point, Julie, I agree that a staffing plan clearly would be beneficial for this entire process. And will hopefully demonstrate, what appropriate staffing levels might look like for all city departments in an ideal world, and identify a plan in which we could potentially get there. Of course, funding, availability, and subject to council approval. But a roadmap certainly would be helpful.
Yeah, I also think it's, hopefully this body can serve as an advisory to the council and to the mayor about what we think the priorities are. So I think if we did know about these positions in advance, we could both give our opinion to the mayor, maybe give some context prior to council discussions about these issues, and then also let the council know about what's being discussed and give them an opportunity to watch a meeting and hear discussion on it prior to the budget process, prior to we're deciding whether or not to include it in the budget. It's like a different context but I understand that there's, staffing issues lead to not being able to have this stuff in front of us in advance so we can have those discussions. But I think I will, add on to Alder Rutherford's point. I think we could hopefully serve as an additional sounding board prior to it being included in the budget or to the council looking at it in the budget process.
Well, and hopefully next year when we do get those results, maybe around June, July, we can bring it to the personnel committee and you can be advisory and help us figure out what positions we want to propose to the mayor and be part of that plan. So we'll have to I'll definitely keep that in mind for next year.
Great.
To make sure.
Any other announcements? No. Great. So I will go ahead and, do we need a motion to adjourn or can I just?
I think motion.
Okay. Our last item is adjournment. I'll take I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So move.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. We are adjourned at 5:53 p.m.